This is Sg2 Perspectives, a conversation with Sg2 experts and industry thought leaders about the biggest trends in healthcare and what we expect that's going to mean for the future of healthcare delivery. Welcome to Sg2 Perspectives Live. I'm your host, Trevor DaRin. I'm joined by my three colleagues, Bill Woodson, Rebecca Limestall, and Brian Esser. Today, live in front of I wish, studio, but remote studio audience. And we want to hear from Bill, Rebecca, and Brian a lot of what we've been hearing from the road, from members around really our big theme for at least the first half of the year, which is pivotal moments, pivot points. What I'm hearing from systems is they feel like there's some big decisions on the table, and I'm hearing an enormous variation in what they're focusing on and the amount of tension and stress they feel about this idea that they have to make just a couple big bets this year. Those that are in a little safer, more comfortable financial position, I also think have made a couple big bets already in the last year, 18 months. They feel a little more comfortable. Those that are still struggling, I see a lot of tension and uncertainty about where they're going to play and where they're going to feel comfortable. Bill, I'll go to you first. What are some of the big themes, big pivots on the table you're hearing across members you're talking with?
As usual, it's market specific, but this year, as we've noted before, there's a lot of internal focus on organizational structure, on deploying strategy, service line, action steps. It's not about responding to market conditions. It's about organizing, reorganizing, restructuring the health system for the next several years, betting on some version of a 2030 strategic plan. Much more internal than I recall from the last couple of years.
Yeah, Rebecca, similar?
I'm actually hearing a little bit of that pivot point come to reality when I'm working with boards and leadership teams. I've actually heard directly from two different leadership teams who would say, we are at a pivot point, moving from survival to thriving in the long term and really thinking about growth and not just about the day-to-day. So that's still there.
Brian, how about you? You're often in front of financial audiences or talking to financial leadership. Same pattern?
From the financial side, there's a recognition that we ended last year, 2023, at a median operating margin of around 2.5%. But the variation across the markets, and we do this a lot in conjunction with our Coffin Hall colleagues, has widened since before the pandemic, with the top aggressive high-end players that we think are throwing off good operating margins, sitting anywhere, let's say the 75th percentile is around 11 or 10, 11%. But those at the 25th or below continuing to erode. So the idea of pivoting is strategy teams coming in line and alongside the financial side and thinking about your CFOs, your managed care leads, because the pivots around driving that margin have to be top line driven, growth oriented. We're not going to cut our way to prosperity, but we need to understand what does that look like. And that's leaning in from the strategy side and all the angles on the physician enterprise, your ability to take on risk, all the data you're leveraging. How can you bring that to the CFO and his team or her team in a much more meaningful way? So as they're going out to payers, employers, those are actually buying this care, and really tell the story in a much more meaningful way as far as why we need to be sustainable in a meaningful way.
The market variation is huge. We'll talk with organizations where we go from one call of an organization who is really struggling and is on the brink of closure or being sold at a fire sale. And then the next call, we're talking about huge investments. It's a huge amount of variation, and what growth means for different organizations seems different as well.
In my experience, especially recently, people are coming to us with earlier stage ideas and very willing for us to say, that might not be a great idea, and here's why. We're just trying to throw a bunch of things at the wall and see what sticks. Bill, have you seen different patterns between big nationals, regional systems, AMCs?
I'm going to go to Tori on this one, which is there's still the fight for capacity. But Tori, you and I were on a webcast or a Zoom call where they were very large system, very specific about saying, we need to chase these procedures to make money. This is where the margin comes from. How do we build the pipeline? How does that fit into our forecasting? What's your take on that?
I think that organizations are increasingly focused on how do they capture the revenue generating procedural volumes, but I think they're being a bit more pragmatic about it as well and thinking about what are the clinical programs that I also have to build out to support that potential growth strategy. Because I think that they realize it's about more than solely capturing the surgical volume and taking more of a position of care management.
I just heard it today. I was with a group of CEOs over the last 2 days, and the idea of strategy is fantastic, but do we have the operational rigor at the service line level across our entire system of care, the entire footprint to actually pull this off? And a lot of CEOs saying, I don't know if our operations can really handle this, or we're nimble enough and agile enough to take the strategies and crystallize them into real world outcomes. That gap we need to narrow much more aggressively.
One of the pivot points that I'm seeing is a pivot to intentionality and being really purposeful in those decisions, whether it's operational or thinking about their strategies moving forward and where they want to place their bets.
Now I'm going to jump a little bit to some headlines we've seen, and the headlines are all over the place. We could take a lot of different meaning from some of these signals. I want to hear how the three of you are interpreting some of these new things. We've seen a handful of players who this time last year, someone at Exec Summit might have said we need to pay attention to how they're playing, especially in the retail space. And we've seen a bunch of exits, Walmart being the biggest, maybe most surprising. Brian, what do you think of that?
There's a bit of reflection here going on of if Walmart couldn't pull it off, we knew this was coming. We saw this with Berkshire and we've seen it with other entities trying to do the foray into healthcare. And healthcare is hard. That's just the reality. So there's different pivots there, but there's a lot of organizations that have enough dry powder and organizational appetite to keep pushing here. Amazon being one, but Google others. It might be premature to say disruptors can't make this work, but there is lessons to be learned from the Walmart and others like Cano Health or others we're seeing are filing for bankruptcy or just exiting the strategy. My colleague Cassie Rattler, who studies this space, would say it's really getting as close to that premium dollar as possible. That's going to be critical from a disruptor point of view, but also understanding that a scalability primary care only entity is going to be challenging in that business model on a fee-for-service type basis. We need to understand as a system, where do we play in the fee-for-service or value world? How close are we to the premium? And then how do we continue to link the entire system of care to minimize cost while improving quality is going to be vastly critical.
I also think we can learn a bit about how other organizations outside of healthcare think about investment. We've done a whole series on this of thinking like an investor, but one of the things we need to think about is when do we get out of something? Walmart, others, they've thought about that. Health systems haven't been so great about getting out of things if they don't work.
There's still a list, and Amazon's going to hang in there because they have plenty of money. They're a bit opaque. We don't know how well One Medical is doing or not, but I would definitely watch the pharmacy side of their business. They announced a big deal with Blue Shield of California that has nearly 5 million members, along with Mark Cuban's company, and like disrupting the PBM space. The Amazon headlines will be the ones to watch for the rest of the year and what they stay in, what they get out of, and their patience for the complexity of how hard this is.
There's an underlying physician element here because you need your physicians, your APPs, others to deliver on these. And it does call into question, what has our alignment strategy been as a health system to physicians aside from pure employment? Because we know at employment, the average subsidy at this point is almost $300,000. That's not sustainable moving forward. But what are physicians looking for that's maybe attracting them to these disruptor or private equity backed models that we as health systems could be providing as well? And I was just with a group, the AMA, reporting out on burnout dynamics within the physician side. It's come down slightly, which is great, but it's still at 50% burnout. So we need to figure out how to solve for that, cleaning up the inbox, using technology to give them time back to do the clinical delivery that they want to do and not be so much administrative focused. If we can solve for some of that, maybe that shores up our defenses against these other opportunities.
This is an area that Trevor and I have been spending a lot of time researching, physician alignment, particularly in primary care. And the best way that a lot of organizations have classified this is haphazard at best. So how do we change our thinking and also go after that a bit more intentionally?
Patients are still burned out, but they're just sick of going to the meetings. So they said, no, I'm fine.
It's not exactly retail, although it's a retail company, which is Best Buy, which has started to dip into home care. They announced some pretty positive news on the first quarter earnings call about how that's going and how they're working with partners, delivering home care with remote monitoring, with technology to reduce falls. So they have some great evidence there. They've also been working with HCA on delivering CAR T cell therapy at home. The home care space is still worth paying attention to as a means to scale other aspects of what's going on in healthcare right now.
All right, Bill, I'm going to come back to you because on the one hand, at one of our recent CEO meetings, we asked if people thought they were going to grow through M&A in the next year, and every hand went up. On the other hand, we see the FTC taking a closer, harder look, scrutiny across the board of healthcare M&A. What are you seeing? What's a signal? What's noise?
The pace of it is hard to predict because the FTC is adding more scrutiny to it. And we saw some larger deals last year actually not go through for various reasons, more cultural or governance things. But we know discussions are underway. There are deals in the pipeline. Our colleagues at Kaufman All tell us how robust that pipeline is. It's going to move slowly. The FTC, they're starting to take a hard look at what private equity is playing at with, particularly in the physician group space. So there was just a decision this week about, this goes back 2012 with an anesthesiology company. And Is it the company under scrutiny or is it the private equity investor? It's just another level of scrutiny on deals in our industry that's going to slow down stuff. Everywhere we go, most people expect more and larger deals to continue over the next couple of years. Do they add value? Do they push up prices? Do they create benefit to the consumers in the markets? These are the questions on the table.
Bill, that's it. We have yet to prove the benefits of clinical scale through large mergers and acquisitions. There's absolutely financial and operational scale, but can we get to clinical scale? If we can get there, we can fight back against some of those things.
All right, Brian, why don't you go down just one path around M&A related stuff and big news around non-competes? I know you work really closely with our team in DC. What's the expectation on the impact for healthcare?
Non-compete announcement came out. And from what we're looking at, there's a window here to implementation. I think it's 180 days, give or take, where we're at in that timeline. The question becomes, will that actually come to stand? There's going to be a ton of lawsuits. We're already seeing those being filed. And the question for the courts is, are there any damages yet? Or do we need to actually see that be implemented before our damage is incurred? And then you can actually get the lawsuits and potentially pause the entire thing. That's not my area of expertise. The bigger question is, for nonprofit healthcare specifically, do non-competes apply at all? And if so, in what function? If we own a for-profit subsidiary, how do we think about that? But ultimately, we need to be factoring this into our physician discussions. And it goes back to the alignment dynamic. Do our physicians want to be with us, whether employed or affiliated in some other way, or JV, co-management, you name it, PSA? And then what does that look like? And what can we do to retain that talent and not have to really worry about these non-compete dynamics? There's certain states, California being one, that non-competes have been pushed out for a while now. So there's lessons to be learned on a state-by-state basis. So we'll be looking into that, but it's going to be that balance of, do you have the right alignment, vehicle, and storyline to keep your physicians close? And then can you ward off whatever other potential competitors or threats might be coming, other systems, disruptors, et cetera, for those physicians?
Trevor, just one more note on M&A. So Kaiser just withdrew $3.5 billion from their private equity investments because they have their own investment funds. They're going to do something with this money. So let's see what they do. They have their relationship with the guys here now. So they're going to deploy that capital somehow.
They're going to try to hire Bill.
Yeah. They can't afford me. No, obviously. Exactly. Yeah.
All right, Rebecca, I'm going to come to you first with this next one. Just something you heard that was really surprising. Could have been from a board, could have been in passing, could have been on a call, a surprising question. What was something that really stood out to you?
I don't know if it's surprising, but the amount of conversation that we're having right now about organizational structure, design, and what that looks like is higher than I've seen in a number of years. We have a lot of organizations who are rethinking, whether it's because they've been through mergers and acquisitions, or they are just rethinking what is their business model and how are they going to best support that through their org structure. That's a lot of what we're hearing. It's also some cost concerns as well. But that's the piece that I think is occurring more these days that I'm hearing a lot more about. And then on the flip side, one of the areas that we have learned a lot about, and Trevor, you're doing a lot of this research as well, is what is that role of the CSO, the Chief Strategy Officer, in that future organization? How will they guide the organization through change? How will they help execute? And how will they get to that vision? There's some really fun things to think about there as we reshape strategy at organizations. I don't know if that's so much surprising, but the amount of questions about org structure always surprise me.
Brian, how about you?
Org structure is a tough one to follow. So we work with a group of payer strategy leads across the country and was on a call with them last week. We're about to release a piece on Medicare Advantage. We're excited about that. No, we do not have the silver bullet nor the solve for that. So that will not be in there. But was asking them, has the tension level cooled off this year, just given all the dynamics and just the challenges we had last year in the contractual cycles? And their response was unfortunately no. In fact, we're expecting it to be even worse going in through this year into 25 based on how CMS somewhat gave a haircut to the payers. So they're looking to trim benefits. They're looking to drive margin over membership at this point, and it's going to show up on the contractual side. So as much as we want to think that MA is a problem child today, we're looking at that to be a bigger book of the overall payer mix moving forward as compared to traditional Medicare and everything else. And then the rates and yield there to continue to be compressed. So that's going to be a challenge.
Bill, how about you?
I'm feeling a disconnect between leadership and boards right now of its timing. While the boards are watching the income statement and the balance sheet, leadership is pivoting to let's look forward. There's just a lack of fundamental understanding at the board level of what's really going on in healthcare. And I don't mean that to sound insulting. I'm sure in the largest systems, that's not the case, but I've had that experience this year. And the other topic I would bring up is that I think there's a lack of awareness of the breakthroughs that are coming in certain aspects of technology that are pivotal. So that's clinical technologies related to cellular therapy. It's the smart hospital. It's things related to AI and rev cycle and how we're going to solve workforce problems. There's a lot bubbling right below the surface that is not being discussed that we're trying to raise, obviously.
It's the compounding impact of all of those things that's creating this culture, this environment of change. We have the things that are always changing, financials, workforce, those are challenging. And then we have that next level of intentional change. Maybe we've gone through some mergers, maybe things like that, but there's the looming things on the horizon, smart hospitals, integration of some of the cellular therapies. They could radically change what we do.
Bill, I'm going to go back to you. What aren't you hearing people talk about that you maybe thought we'd be talking about more that you think health systems should be talking about right now?
I already brought up clinical. I would say the workforce topic has faded to the background a bit, meaning there's an acknowledgement, as our colleague Manny brings up, like, this is what we have. Let's just solve for it. Don't use the word shortage anymore. Let's be creative in how we think about the future of care delivery. And that's refreshing, which means we're taking a critical look at the care delivery processes, unless we're hacked in cybersecurity, but we're not covering that today. That's good. There's topics we talked about the last few years that are not coming up as frequently.
I would push on that as my, maybe not workforce. It depends on the audience we're in front of, but it's still, if not the number 1A or 1B issue, folks need to be thinking about. And one thing that we've put out just this year, that our economic index, which is a fancy word for trying to read the tea leaves here, but we've blended in there the idea of housing affordability, or where are the investment dynamics going on from really the feds through the CHIP Act and CHIPS and Science Act or IRA. Like, there's a lot of interesting dynamics going across the different markets, regions that are going to push and or pull on the workforce. Either your workforce can't afford to live in your region just based on housing, and what does that do to your overall supply? Or maybe your region's booming and the workforce, especially at the lower skilled, maybe tech level, has a myriad more options that they would have 5 years ago across retail, tech, Amazon warehouses, you name it. And is that going to put another pressure point on the organization? So are you looking out that far within your organization, then around your geography, and saying, where else could this workforce go and how do I need to compete with that?
Brian, I've heard this from 3 Systems this year in their capital planning, building housing for the workforce as just part of the equation they're solving for.
In a lot of these high-end markets, that's the only solution. They need that. One of the things that's surprising that we're not talking about it as much is strategy's role in managing change. Now, I'm purposely using the words managing change as opposed to change management because that means something really specific. Our role as strategists in managing change, part of that is guiding the organization through that process. It's strategic execution. It's also setting the vision. I'm seeing a lot more organizations return to the long-term planning, thinking about various scenarios into the future, and even thinking about the impact of things like climate change or transientness of a population, and how will that impact what the care delivery needs are in 15, 20, 30 years.
All good ones. Thanks for sharing. Team, I have no problem saying thank you so much. This was even more fun than I expected. Thanks all. If you like this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us, and or follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn at Sg2 Healthcare. And if you want to talk more about innovative healthcare strategies, you can always email me at sg2perspectives@sg2.com. Finally, Sg2 is a Vizient company, and there are a bunch of Vizient podcasts that you might like. You can find them at Vizient /podcasts. Have a great day.